I was still bleeding from emergency surgery, holding my 3-day-old son to my chest, when my own father walked through that hospital door. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't look at the baby. He just threw a stack of legal documents onto my lap, right over my bandaged incision, and said 4 words I will never forget. "Sign it, right now." My IV line was still attached to my arm, my surgical staples were still healing, and the man who was supposed to protect me was standing over my hospital bed, treating me like a transaction. But here is what my father didn't know that morning. The moment he walked into that room, he didn't walk into a hospital suite. He walked into a trap, and I had been building it for 3 weeks. To everyone in Boston's elite real estate circles, the Sterling family was everything. Old money, Beacon Hill mansion, the kind of family whose name opened doors before you even knocked. But I grew up behind those mahogany doors, and I can tell you exactly what that family was. My name is Chloe, and for 30 years, I was the invisible engine of the Sterling family. While my older brother Mason was treated like a genetic masterpiece for simply existing, I worked 80-hour weeks. I built my career as an architectural designer from nothing, co-signed my father's bridge loans, funded Mason's office renovations, and smiled at every passive-aggressive comment at the dinner table. My father Richard believed a family's reputation was written in assets, not affection. My mother Eleanor saw me as nothing more than a human ATM to fund their lifestyle. I spent a decade believing that if I sacrificed enough, they would finally love me. Then I met Liam. He was a high school history teacher who measured success by the lives he touched, not the portfolios he managed. When we got married, my mother wore black to the wedding. She whispered to guests that I was settling for a civil servant. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I had peace. Liam and I moved into a sunlit brick townhouse, and I thought I had finally escaped. But what I didn't know was that my family had been watching my happiness from a distance, waiting for the one thing that would unlock a $12 million fortune. They were waiting for my son. You need to understand something about my grandfather's trust. He was a brilliant man who built a real estate empire from nothing, and he knew exactly what his son Richard was. So when he set up the timber trust, he made sure Richard and Mason could never touch it. The $12 million would transfer automatically to the first biological mother of the next generation's grandson. For 7 years, Mason and his wife Harper had tried and failed to claim it. Then my 12-week scan confirmed I was having a boy, and suddenly, the father who had ignored me for years was calling 3 times a day, dripping with fake warmth, steering every conversation toward the trust, asking questions about my due date, my lawyer, my plans. I told myself he had finally changed. I was wrong. My labor was a nightmare. My heart rate dropped without warning, and I was rushed into an emergency C-section. I woke up shivering, in more pain than I had ever felt in my life. But the moment they placed Noah in my arms, the world went completely quiet. That silence lasted exactly 3 days. On the 3rd morning, Liam went downstairs to handle some insurance paperwork. I was alone with Noah, half asleep, when I heard the door click open. It wasn't a nurse. It was all of them. Richard, Eleanor, Mason, Harper. Walking into my private suite like they owned it. The room instantly felt like it had no air left. Richard didn't say hello. He didn't look at his grandson. He dropped a thick stack of documents directly onto my lap, pressing against my bandaged incision. "Sign the revocable waiver of trust rights, Chloe," he said, like he was asking me to sign a dinner check. I looked at him. "What is this?" Mason stepped forward, sneering. "It's common sense. What is a teacher's wife going to do with a real estate empire? Sign it, and we'll make sure you're taken care of." I told them to get out. That's when everything changed. Richard lunged forward and grabbed my hair, yanking me upright with enough force that my IV line tore from my arm. I felt my surgical incision pull and burn under the strain, and I screamed, not from fear, but from a pain so sharp it took my breath completely away. I collapsed forward, clutching Noah, trying to protect him. Mason stood over me and said the words I will never forget for the rest of my life. "Sign it, or we come back for the baby." They fled the moment they heard a nurse's cart in the hallway, left me on that floor, shaking, holding my son. But here is what they didn't understand. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The part of me that had spent 30 years hoping they would love me, that part died on that hospital floor. What replaced it was something cold, something patient, something they had never seen from me before. Because sitting in the corner of that room the entire time, quietly writing everything down on a legal pad, was Liam's father, Thomas, a retired corporate attorney with 30 years of experience. They hadn't even noticed him. The next morning, the police came, but Richard had already built his wall. All 4 of them had signed matching statements, saying I had suffered a post-labor dizzy spell and fallen. The officer looked at me with genuine pity, but without recorded evidence, he said there was nothing he could do against a family like the Sterlings. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. One text message: "The police won't help you. Sign the waiver or we tie you up in custody disputes until you have nothing left. Choose wisely." I read that message 3 times, and then I put the phone down, and the crying stopped, just like that. The desperation, the grief, the 30 years of trying to earn their love, all of it evaporated. What was left was something I had never felt before, a cold, crystal-clear focus. I looked at Thomas. "Can he use the trust's own money to fight me in court?" I asked. Thomas smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile I had never seen on him before. "Not if you officially assume control first. The moment Noah was born, you became the managing trustee. You already hold the controlling voting shares of your father's entire firm, Chloe. He just doesn't know it yet." I leaned back against my pillow. "Thomas," I said, "open your laptop. We are going to build a cage around my father, and I want to make absolutely sure he never finds the door." For the next 3 weeks, I went completely silent. I ignored every call from my mother, every threatening email from Mason. I let them believe their intimidation had worked. I let them think I was isolated, overwhelmed, and ready to give in. Behind closed doors, Thomas and I were performing a forensic audit of the Sterling family firm's financial records. What we found was extraordinary. For years, Richard had been forging my grandfather's signature to secure fraudulent loans, funding the mansion, the Mercedes, the country club memberships, the entire lifestyle. It was textbook federal bank fraud, grand larceny, and every forged document was sitting right there in the company files, perfectly preserved. "If we go to the police now, their lawyers will stall for years," Thomas said. "Then we don't give them time to prepare," I said. I had already found the perfect stage. The annual Boston Real Estate Gala, 3 weeks away, where Richard Sterling was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award in front of every powerful person in New England. I used my authority as managing trustee to quietly buy out the gala's primary media sponsorship. That gave me complete control over every screen, every speaker, every microphone in that ballroom. Then I sent my mother one text message. "Mom, I'm exhausted from fighting. I'll bring the signed waiver to the gala on Thursday. Let's end this as a family." She replied within 30 seconds. They were so blinded by greed, they didn't even check the updated event program. The grand ballroom of the Boston Marriott was filled with politicians, real estate executives, and every local news outlet in the city. My family sat at the center VIP table, radiating confidence. Harper was wearing diamonds. Mason was already on his 2nd glass of champagne. Richard caught my eye across the room and leaned over to whisper, "Smart move, Chloe. Hand over the waiver after my speech and we'll forget this ever happened." I smiled at him. "Of course, Dad," I said. "Tonight is all about exposure." He didn't catch it. 10 minutes later, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. Richard straightened his tuxedo and walked toward the golden microphone at the center of the stage, waving to the applause. And then the 30-foot LED screens behind him turned on. But they didn't show his corporate highlight reel. the ballroom's entire sound system filled with one sound: a baby crying. The room went completely still, and then my voice came through every speaker, clear and steady. My name is Chloe Sterling. 3 days after my emergency C-section, my father came to my hospital room and demanded I sign away my son's $12 million inheritance. When I refused, this is what happened. Then came Richard's voice, recorded on Thomas's phone that morning in my hospital suite, amplified now across every speaker in that ballroom. Sign it, or we come back for the baby. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I have ever heard, in a room full of people. On the screens behind Richard, I projected the medical documentation of my injuries, then the certified audit report, then page after page of my grandfather's forged signatures, each one dated, each one linked to a fraudulent loan withdrawal. Richard froze at the microphone. His face went the color of paper. Mason stood up so fast he knocked his champagne glass across the table. He started screaming at the AV booth to cut the feed, but my security team was already in position. 4 federal marshals walked down the center aisle of that ballroom. They stepped directly onto the stage. They turned Richard away from the microphone, pulled his arms behind his back, and clicked steel handcuffs around his wrists, in front of every camera, every journalist, every colleague he had ever impressed with the Sterling name. 2 more officers came for Mason. Harper screamed and covered her face with her hands as the cameras turned toward her. The Viper's Nest had been cleared. The legal process was thorough, and it was merciless. Richard's assets were frozen within days. The Beacon Hill mansion was seized as part of the fraud recovery. His firm was dissolved. He and my mother relocated to a small rental apartment in a city where no one knew the Sterling name. And Richard began the process of fighting federal charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. Mason, stripped of his allowance and his connections overnight, found himself starting over with nothing he hadn't actually earned himself. Which, as it turned out, was almost nothing at all. As for me, I am standing in the nursery of our new home right now, watching Liam rock Noah to sleep in the afternoon light. The $12 million trust is clean, protected, and waiting for my son's future. The scar on my abdomen is fading, but I don't want it to disappear completely, because that scar is the clearest reminder I have of the exact moment I stopped waiting for people to love me the way I deserved, and started making sure they could never hurt me again. I stopped waiting for them to deserve me. That was the day everything changed. Richard Sterling stood on that stage, expecting a Lifetime Achievement Award. What he received instead was the consequence of every choice he had ever made. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me in the comments. Do you think I went too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Drop a yes or a no right now. I read every single comment personally. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear these stories. Subscribe, because our next story is already waiting for you. A woman discovers her husband has been secretly funding his mistress's lifestyle using her own business accounts, and she finds out when the mistress calls her. During labor, some people mistake patience for weakness. They always regret it